Back in 2019, Jonathan Hickman was announced to be coming on to the X-Men, and a lot of people got excited about it because with Jonathan Hickman, they believed they were going to get complex storytelling, somebody who generally respected continuity and put a lot of thought and care into the book, something that people felt had been missing from X-Men for a long time. And by and large, many people liked what he did for the comic. However, it was polarizing. It seemed to be either loved it or you hated it, and there was very little middle ground. Um, why is that? What it is about the run that causes people to be so divided about it, and why would a long term X Men fan want this? Let's get into that. Hey everybody, this is Perch. Someone gave me a comment on a recent video I did around just you are the center of your universe. It sounds very Zen like, but the idea there is that basically you could waste your time looking at stats and trying to assess the numbers of comic books and who's selling more of this or that or what's popular, what's not. You can get yourself really worked up about that. At the end of the day, the comics you enjoy are the comics you enjoy, whether they're popular or not. A guy in my shop loved Evil Ernie. That was not the best-selling comic book. Never was anywhere close to it. But that was his favorite comic. That's the world revolved around Evil Ernie. He loved it, and so who was I to tell him he was wrong? I mean, I wasn't going to tell him he was wrong. That was the best comic book for him, and he was happy, and he bought it, and life's good. That was a happy. He was a happy guy, and I think we all deserve to be happy, right? So Jonathan Hickman's X-Men. So Hickman came on. The question has come up. Do you like Hickman's take on X-Men? Because his take is certainly a bold take. He's not doing a safe take on the X-Men. He's really shaken up the entire universe, and it's forever changed kind of who and what the X-Men are. And people seem to be split. Either they absolutely love it, they think it's great, very compelling work, or it's a terrible affront to what the X-Men are. The X-Men are villains now, and they're drug addicts, and all the rest, just terrible. And there's very little middle ground. In reality, there is a big middle ground. Those are the people who just aren't reading it and don't really care one way or another. That's the middle ground. But in terms of fans, many people like it. I'm one of them. I like what he did, but for a very unique reason. I'm not sure my reason is the same as others, but my reason is I like comics that decide to take chances and do bold things and I've used this expression before, commit to the bit. So in this case, the X-Men, we're going to upend status quo. We are going to take advantage of all the sci-fi aspects of what X-Men are and what mutants are, and the fact they are fundamentally different from humans, and we're going to set them apart. We're going to dive into kind of their incredibly dense, incredibly rich history and of all the things they do, and set up some nice things to play with the X-Men. I like that. I also like the fact that Hickman is playing the long game. So some people have complained about the single issue kind of one-offs that the X-Men have encountered, but every single issue to date have introduced new threats, new complexities, new kind of tangents to who the X-Men are, what they're all about, and where they're going, and the threats that they've got. Almost in every direction, we've got new threats to the X-Men. Some new, some old. And this is very Claremont. So if you read the X-Men in the 70s, the 80s in particular, you loved the Claremont era because he had a million subplots. Well, not a million, but he had dozens of subplots going on at any given time, and you had the feeling that if Claremont decided to just kind of wrap it up and go to his end game, he would have years of stories to tell, just kind of pulling the different threads of the story together to finish it up. And if you're like me, there were a certain category of fans that were upset when John Byrne, Jim Lee took over the book when they did the big relaunch, and Claremont was kind of unceremoniously kind of pushed aside in the title. And then it went to some good artists. I like John Byrne, I like Jim Lee, but neither one was Claremont. And I felt the story kind of lost something in that period. It was not what it was. A lot of people remember the 90s very, very fondly. They remember things like the Extinction Agenda and others as amazing stories. There were some amazing stories in there, but there was also a lot of, it was a turbulent time because while you had a few years of good Jim Lee artwork and Rob Liefeld's over there on X Force and you had all that kind of stuff, they quickly exited quickly in the grand scheme of things. But you think the long game of decades worth of X-Men comics, they were on there for a relatively short amount of time, and then they went sideways to Image to do their own stuff, and that kind of introduced an era of not the best X-Men era. We had Wolverine devolved into kind of a feral creature, and we had Onslaught. We just had a lot of kind of X-Men stories that did not feel as thought through and compelling. The Scott Lobdell days, the Chuck Austin days, we had just a lot of kind of silly nonsense. And then Grant Morrison came in, and he did try and do something very fundamentally different to the X-Men. And I personally liked Grant Morrison's X-Men a little bit more than I liked Grant Morrison's work at DC. And for two reasons. One, I mean, I grew up with the X-Men, so they're always near and dear to my heart. And Grant Morrison was also a little more restrained. He had big, high concept, crazy ideas, but it wasn't as nuts as some of his DC work would become. It's kind of like the Final Crisis series he did, where I really liked the first half of what Morrison did, and then the second half seemed to go completely off the rails and be a very strange, convoluted book. I felt like the X-Men was really, in many ways, the first half of that Final Crisis in terms of tone. So I like the X-Men when it's very complex. I like it when it's dense. I like it when it's got a lot of lore. I like it when it's has a supporting cast of thousands. And that's always what it felt like with Claremont. There were some crazy things that Claremont was doing and going on. He was depowering mutants and then giving powers back, and they were going through the Siege Perilous, and they were living in Australia for a while, and then they couldn't be picked up by electronics. And I mean, just so many things that Claremont was doing in his universe. And if you were an X-Men fan in the 80s and you had kind of the Claremont X-Men and you had the Louis Simonson X Factor, and you had these books that all felt pretty nice. They were definitely their own stories, but you had a universe to play in, and it felt like a big immersive universe with a lot of potential. So when Hickman came in, there were a few things he did right for me right away, and one of those was he decided to go with a very complex, deep, rich universe. He did not go for shallow X-Men. He went for a lot of very, very dense material. The data sheets that you have in the comics are necessary just to kind of, rapidly flesh out what people are thinking. In the Claremont time, the data sheets would be the equivalent of a year's worth of comics, of subplots and other things that you would just read as you go. Here we're trying to speed it up a little bit because we're trying to return to that era. So the data sheets become the Cliff Notes version of what would have been a lot of comic pages. And I think that Hickman has also tapped into a lot of very obscure storylines. Claremont had the three, and I'm going to get it wrong, but the World War II soldiers, I think, then they had been cybernetically enhanced, and there was no, I'm sorry, I've got it wrong. I'm mixing it up with the Reavers. There was a group there as well. No, I'm talking about the old vets, and then they came off. There's a God, why can't I remember this? There's a speedster and a guy who was strong, and they kind of battled some of the X-Men for a while. And I remember at the time people were like, "Oh, the X-Men fighting old people. What is this? This is pathetic. What it's gone to." But the general fans liked it. It was something nutty and wacky. And so back in X-Men number, I can't remember now, 2 or 3, I think 3. We had the X-Men with the horticulturalists, the botanists that were old and trying to steal some of the Krakoan flowers, and they get the better of the X-Men. It had that same kind of irreverent but wacky. But I mean, I think that stuff is very much, if you were a longtime X-Men fan, meaning back in the 80s, there's a familiarity to it. Maybe it's a little bit like nostalgia. It's a warm, comfortable feeling like this is the X-Men that was not afraid to take chances, that not everything worked. I mean, I'm not a fan of the old, grandma botanist team, but I do, it feels connected to that X-Men, kind of the crazy X-Men stories of old. I mean, Mojo was this giant, fat, blobby, slug-like thing on mechanical spider legs that would put out a reality TV show starring baby X-Men. I mean, that's insane of a concept. And yet, if you're an X-Men fan, Mojo, feels like, something significant. It feels like, part of that history. So you grab onto it. So it's good that Hickman is introducing similar kind of crazy concepts, while at the same time they're doing things like the Orcus facility out near the sun that's trying to build Sentinels, and maybe Nimrod, and they've got the children and how all that's going on. So there's all these, the vault. You've got all these different elements kind of all coming to play, and I think that it feels like Hickman is taking the X-Men universe and world seriously. That even though he knows a lot of these elements are ridiculous and fantastical, and they're very comic book, but yet it still feels like he's trying to he's treating it like a serious topic. And so if you're an X-Men fan, I think you look at it in these ways. One, it reminds you a little bit of Claremont. Two, it's picking up threads of characters that are so long forgotten that nobody's dealt with them before. Three, he's not shying away from dumb things in the X-Men's past. He's acknowledging it. He's bringing that some of that stuff back up, and he's saying, you know what, if it happened, it counts, and I'm going to deal with it. There's a certain respect factor. It feels like, as an X-Men fan, I feel like I've been respected for my loyalty of 50 some odd years of X-Men comics, that he's not just going to kind of pick and choose what he wants to deal with. At the same time, the idea that the X-Men cannot be killed and they're being resurrected and everything else, that feels like a dangerous concept, because where are the stakes? But even there, it like the classic thing about the X-Men. I remember when I would read the X-Men, I'd read interviews that said, oh, the Parker luck. Parker's the guy who can never quite get it right. And I always thought, no, that's the X-Men. The X-Men are the ones who are hunted and feared mutants who they're always waiting for that other shoe to drop. Maybe Parker has some bad luck, and oh no, his brand new suit he bought for the job interview got mud splashed on it when he bought the Rhino, and now he's gonna not get the job. Oh, that Parker luck. Whereas the mutants are like, hey, they're trying to have a nice Christmas and things are settling in, but some genetically cloned mutant hunters are going to mass murder all of their buddies down in the sewers, and now their lives in jeopardy, and Kitty Pryde is forever transparent and can't touch anything. Let's see how that relationship with Colossus goes now, huh? That seems to be kind of the mutants don't just have bad luck; they have disaster luck. So I like that feel. I like that approach. It doesn't feel like the comics are being taken for granted. Back during certainly the last 5 to 10 years, while the battle with Fox was going on, and the X-Men were just completely ignored. They were trying to make the humans work at the expense of the X-Men, all that kind of stuff. That was the terrible era. And what we have now feels a lot more like, we're trying something new. And so I like that. I generally trust Hickman. I liked his Avengers run. I liked his Fantastic Four run. I think I loved East of West. So a lot of it has to do with me just liking the author and what he brings to the table as well. But where it can go wrong, two ways. One, there are other writers being introduced into this X-Men universe, and some of them I definitely do not like their style. Leah Williams is an example of, I do not like her style as a writer. I find her books to be like she's just being too cute with herself, and the work's not good enough to be that cute. So I don't care for her stuff, and these topics that Hickman's bringing up around resurrection and what does it mean to be human, and kind of the overarching threat tends to get hurt if the comics suddenly don't seem serious and the quality has kind of dropped a little bit. That's why I did like Brian Edward Hill's Fallen Angels. I felt like there was a dark kind of tone and pale to the comic. It was lyrical in a sense, but it was also, the threats felt real. Benjamin Percy has managed to carry a lot of that on with his book. Gary Duggan with Marauders, half the time it's there, half the time it feels like they're being cute again with giving Kitty Pryde some knuckle tattoos, and Pyro's got a giant skull tattoo on his face. Teenie Howard, her Excalibur seems goofy at times. You don't get that same feeling like they're taking it seriously. And so to me, I guess at the end of the day, I feel like Hickman is trying to take this property, this book, these characters seriously. I feel like he's trying to put out a serious book with real consequences, real stakes for comic readers, and I love that. So that's why I'm fond of the run. Like I said, it can certainly go bad. I also worry a little bit the whole them being resurrected over and over again, and have they lost their souls in the process? And it does feel like, and I think everybody should realize, if you've been following Hickman through his career for any length of time, this is not going to end well. We know it's not going to end well. We know that he likes to set up big stakes kind of right out the gate. He did it with the Council of Reeds back in the very first Fantastic Four. He did it with the idea that the multiverse is collapsing in Avengers. Um, and then it goes bad. And so I think that the kind of, surprise car to Moira and the resurrection and all of this stuff, it is, it has the feeling of, the other shoe is going to drop, and we're going to learn that, the true X-Men are maybe prisoners somewhere in a dark cave, something. And these are all just imposters who are, I mean, or who knows? I mean, one thing is for certain, the other shoe is going to drop. There's a dark underbelly underneath this whole series. And to me, that's what the X-Men have always been about. So that's why I like it. Some people definitely do not, for a lot of reasons. They feel like they're abusing the characters and it hasn't gone well. That's totally fine. I mean, everybody has their own tastes, and if it works for you, it works for you. But those are my reasons. That's my analysis on X-Men. Hope that was helpful. Otherwise, what do you think? Do you like the run? Do you not like the run? What are the storm clouds on the horizon? What are the things that worry you about, the run, and if its quality can be kept up, or maybe you don't like it at all and it's getting worse? What do you think about the book? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, subscribe, follow me on Twitter @ComicPerch, and thank you for listening.